You know the story of the Titanic, right? We all do. This massive, unsinkable ship, a dark, freezing night, and a disastrous run-in with an iceberg. It's the official story, the one that's been told for over 100 years.
But what if that's not the complete picture? What if the iceberg was just one piece of a much bigger, much more complicated puzzle? Well, for decades, that's exactly what people have been trying to figure out. And today, we're opening the case file.
All right, let's get into it. First, we'll lay out the official story and the big questions that just never went away. Then we're going to dig into three major theories. A wild one about a secret ship swap, another about a fire burning deep inside the hull, and some incredible forensic science about a hidden weakness. And finally, we'll lay out our final verdict.
Okay, so first things first, let's get the official story straight. The inquiries back in 1912 gave us a clear sequence of events, but you know what? They also opened the door for a century of debate.
The official timeline is just brutally simple. At 11:40 p.m., a collision. Just 20 minutes later, the crew knows the ship is doomed as 6 compartments are flooding. And then, in only 2 hours and 40 minutes, the unsinkable ship disappears beneath the waves. That was the finding from both the American and British investigations.
But almost right away, people started asking questions. I mean, how could a ship this incredible, this advanced, be taken down by what was described as a glancing blow? That one question has fueled so many other investigations, with theories that say the iceberg was, at best, just the final straw, and at worst, a convenient cover story.
And that leads us to our first case file. And wow, this one is the most dramatic of them all. This is the theory that the ship lying at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean isn't even the Titanic.
So back in 1998, an author named Robin Gardner dropped a bombshell of a theory. He claimed that the White Star Line secretly switched the Titanic with her older sister ship, the Olympic, which had been damaged in an earlier collision. And the motive? A huge insurance scam. The idea was to intentionally sink the damaged Olympic, disguised as the brand new Titanic, and cash in.
So the biggest hole in this theory is, well, the ship itself. They just weren't identical. The Titanic had these huge private suites on its B deck, which meant it didn't have the long open promenade that the Olympic had. Pulling off a switch would have been a massive job, and you can bet that passengers who paid a fortune for those specific suites would have noticed something was up. So right there, the theory starts to look shaky.
And what about that whole insurance motive? Yeah, that doesn't add up either. According to testimony from the time, the Titanic was worth about $7.5 million, but it was only insured for $5 million. Sinking the ship on purpose would have meant a $2.5 million loss for the company. It just doesn't make any financial sense.
And researchers have found even more evidence against it. The insides of the ships were different. The insurance motive is a bust, and official records documented unique details on each ship. But you want to know the final nail in the coffin? It comes from the wreck itself. Parts recovered from the ocean floor are stamped with the construction number 401. That was the Titanic's number. The Olympic? It was number 400.
Historian Gareth Russell really didn't pull any punches when he said the theory was so painfully ridiculous that one can only lament the thousands of trees which lost their lives to print the books about it. The evidence is just overwhelming. Case closed on this one. But just because the switch theory is a bust doesn't mean the iceberg tells the whole story. Our next case file looks at something much more believable, and frankly, something that was actually documented. A fire burning deep inside the ship. Okay, so this theory, really pushed forward by journalist Senan Maloney, suggests that a fire in one of the giant coal bunkers was burning for days, maybe even from before the ship left port. His argument is that this intense fire heated the steel hull and a key wall, a bulkhead, to over 1,000 degrees, making it super brittle and weak, right in the spot where the iceberg would later hit.
Maloney's big piece of evidence was a photo showing this 30-foot black mark on the hull, right near the coal bunker. But, and this is a big but, other historians pointed out that the mark was actually 50 feet away from that spot. Plus, the fire itself wasn't a secret. People knew about it in 1912. So while it was definitely a problem, there's no real forensic proof that it weakened the ship enough to be the main reason it sank. A contributing factor? Maybe. The real reason? The evidence just isn't there. And this brings us to our last case file. And honestly, this is the most compelling one from a scientific standpoint. The smoking gun here isn't some grand conspiracy, but something much, much smaller, hidden in the very metal that held the ship together, its rivets.
So, a couple of researchers, Jennifer McCarty and Tim Fouquet, spent 10 years analyzing rivets brought up from the wreck, and what they discovered was pretty shocking. The rivets used to build the front and back of the ship were full of this stuff called slag. It's basically a waste material. This slag made the rivets incredibly brittle, especially in the icy cold water of the North Atlantic.
So here's how it all went wrong, and fast. The iceberg didn't rip a giant hole in the ship like you see in the movies. Instead, the force of the impact literally popped the heads off these weak, brittle rivets, and once the rivets were gone, the steel plates they were holding together just separated. The seams of the ship opened up like a zipper, letting water gush into 6 different compartments.
McCarty, one of the lead researchers, put it in a way that just gives you chills. She said it was like the unzipping of a seam. It wasn't one big puncture. It was a failure of thousands of tiny parts all at once, leading to an unstoppable flood.
And this is the number that just blows my mind. The total area of all the openings that sank the 46,000-ton Titanic was estimated to be only about 12 square feet. That's it. Think about that. A tiny amount of damage on a massive ship made fatal because of a hidden flaw you couldn't even see.
So, after looking at all the evidence, from conspiracies to coal fires to cold hard science, it's time to close the case file and deliver our final verdict. So here's where we land. The ship switch theory, it's completely debunked. The coal fire, it was real, but it was probably just a contributing factor, not the main cause. The brittle rivets, that's confirmed by forensic evidence as a major structural weakness. And the iceberg, it wasn't the whole story, but it was the catalyst, the trigger that started it all.
The real story of the Titanic isn't about one single thing. It was a fatal combination, a perfect storm. You had the trigger, the iceberg, hitting the ship's hidden weakness, a hull held together by thousands of flawed, brittle rivets. One without the other, and the ship might have survived, but together, it was a catastrophe.
And that really leaves us with one last, kind of unsettling thought. We always want to find these big, simple reasons for disasters. A single villain, a huge conspiracy. But the true story of the Titanic is so much more complex, and maybe a little more scary. It tells us that sometimes a catastrophe isn't one big event, but a million tiny flaws, all lining up at the exact wrong moment. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what tiny, hidden flaws exist in the systems we all rely on every single day.